Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am your host, Louis Falgout.
And I am your other host, Stephen Falgout. Get Recc'd is a fortnightly podcast that my brother and I put on for you all, our listening audience. Every week we recommend something to each other, and then in the week following, we talk about it. Today we'll be talking about two different things. We were on a little bit of a kick where we were accidentally recommending us something in the same genre. In some ways it is in the same genre, but we'll be talking about Rodeo, the Travis Scott album, and Hamilton, the Broadway cast album, but also talking about the musical a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning right off the bat, because all of you can probably notice, the audio quality coming from Steven is not too great. It's because Discord fucked up, and we're using Skype, and everybody loves Skype. Oh, you know what? Actually, that was kind of a dig at Skype, and now we just lost a possible sponsor. So I'll keep those to a minimum. I'm sorry, I'm not being very professional.
I do want to say, though, thank you, Microsoft, for the many years of sponsorship. We're sorry to see you go now because of what Louis has said.
Hey, what I meant was, we all know how everyone loves Skype. I meant that, genuinely. I love Skype. I think it's wonderful, and really, it's just the best way to call somebody. However, it also could be tied with other platforms that are also willing to sponsor us.
I love the way that it allows you to communicate with people around the globe.
For sure, yeah. And that's very I also like how you can click on the buttons that are on the program. I always thought that was really nice. As opposed to just like a window with still frames. It has some interactivity, which is very unique to me on the World Wide Web these days. And I really appreciate that. So thank you, Microsoft.
I also like how it doesn't eat up an unnecessary amount of RAM on your computer. That's my favorite part of it.
Yeah. And
So usually I want to make sure that people know what goes on behind the scenes here. Usually we like to have funnies in the first couple of minutes of our little podcast, but today, no jokes. This is a zero joke podcast.
Yes, and I will be deathly serious. No laughter, no smiling, no giggling, no grinning, nothing of any of that sort. No displays of happiness or joy. This is a straight-faced episode.
The listening audience can tell when you're smiling, and we have to cut down on that because, and I'm going to explain why. This is not a comedy podcast. This is an educational, objectively accurate podcast. Everything we say in this podcast is truth. And when we disagree, that's because there are multiple sides of the truth. So I just want to let everyone know, no jokes from us anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's very important as we go into what I recommended to you, Stephen, last time, which was the album Rodeo by Travis Scott. We are about to present the truth on this album. Travis Scott is a trap rapper. You could call him an auto-crooner, if you really want to do that. I giggled. Oh, my God. Steven, I think I failed, Steven. We can't do this anymore. We have
Shut down the podcast. We
have to stop. Anyway, I guess the no jokes rule's been broken pretty early on. That's kind of shitty. I fucked up, guys. Sorry about that. But, Steven, what did you think of the album Rodeo by Travis Scott?
I thought it was okay. I'm going to just get it out there. Usually we kind of meander a bit and we talk about stuff, but this is a serious podcast. Objectively, no one can argue this. The album was okay.
Cool.
I will say some things about the album now. We have a script, everyone. That's what's happening right now. We have a new script so we can stay on track. No deviations. We have to make sure that it's very mechanical and well organized. for Microsoft. Okay, so I didn't want to call them out, but I think we have to let our listening audience know the truth behind the scenes today.
Yeah.
And now that
power.
they're no longer a sponsor because of what you said, it's okay for us to divulge their secrets.
Yeah, I would say so.
So one thing I noticed about this album, just right off the bat, right into that first track, the production quality is really great. I noticed a lot of really good production of sound, and I think at one point last week you kind of had mentioned that he might have at one time worked with Kanye, and I got a very similar feeling from the production angle as when we talked about Kanye's album a couple weeks ago. I also noticed a lot of, maybe not a lot, but at least a couple samples from certain other tracks, even vocal samples. I want to say the first track kind of starts with just, and some of the other tracks as well are more talking than they are rapping in a lot of situations. That feels very Kanye to me.
Oh, you're talking about like the monologue at the beginning of the album?
Yeah, like some of the monologues and those sorts of things.
Sure, yeah.
I liked a lot of the features on the album. So just talking about the album as kind of collectively right now, I like a lot of the features. The Weeknd. I thought Justin Bieber's feature was kind of interesting, actually. I was surprised that he was even here, but like, okay. 2 Chainz and Quavo. I don't really have a lot of experience with trap. I feel like this was pretty accessible from a trap album. Yet I don't really know what trap albums are like, but I don't feel like this was like, oh man, this is totally new. I can't even get into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's funny because, in my view anyway, I feel like this is not... I mean, is this an introduction to trap? I mean, I don't know. But certainly, like...
I feel like you could give someone this album and say, hey, this is trap. And they go, oh, okay, tell me more.
Yeah, although it's just Travis Scott always gets credit and deserves it for his extremely creative, inventive production that you don't hear from certain other trap artists. You know, I mean, I think, especially if you don't listen to the genre at all, I think the preconceived notions of what you have about what trap is, this album shatters a lot of them. You know, I think there are certain songs like Flying High and Antidote, which sound like exactly what you would kind of expect this to sound like. Well, maybe not exactly, but they certainly have those attributes. But other songs here, like, I mean, Pornography and like, shit, why am I forgetting the name of the song? Wait, what's the one with the numbers? Not 3500, the other one. Fuck, 90210, yeah. And 90210, like, they don't sound like what you think trap would sound like. And certainly, on the production side of things, there's a lot of really, really creative and, like, I would even say psychedelic production flourishes. There are certain songs that have beat switches that come out of absolutely nowhere and completely transition the song. 90210 is a great example. This happens on Flying High, I just mentioned. This happens on For the Hook, or not the hook, but like a little detour that reminded me of like Tyler the Creator a little bit. And like, yeah, so I mean, Pornography, for example, is just laden with tons of effects and weird vocal effects. And you see that in a lot of other songs as well. So, I mean, you know, it's definitely accessible for a trap album. There's no doubt about it that this is an accessible record. But I mean, I don't think trap rap is an inaccessible genre by any means. I think a lot of people hate it without having listened to it. But I don't think it's like, you know, tough to listen to or anything like that. I think what needs to be respected here is that Travis Scott brought a lot of interesting and creative ideas to the table that... are now, you know, kind of mainstays within this genre and pop rap genres and stuff like that as well.
I think one of the things that's interesting is looking through the writer-producer list, and Pharrell shows up. That dude is like on literally everything.
Yeah, pretty much.
Is there something that Pharrell isn't on anymore? Like,
Probably the new Swans album. I don't think Pharrell's gonna have a piece in that one.
okay, you say that now, but
We'll see.
get ready for our bonus episode when it comes up, where we talk about Pharrell's influence on the new Swans album.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll just wear his hat, and that'll be his contribution.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Here's my hat. I'm Pharrell. I thought that this album had a lot of texture. Is that a word that describes music?
Yeah, yeah, it totally is. I agree 100%.
And I feel like it's pretty varied track to track, but not in a way that's feels disorganized or contradictory between the tracks. I feel like the variety is actually really good.
Yeah,
But I think why I just say it's okay is because I don't know. I felt like for the most part, the production was really great, and there were a lot of really good beats. Flow was good, but I don't know. I still felt like there was something missing here. Like a lot of it felt like this was a really great introduction to the genre and to what he was trying to accomplish, but it didn't feel fully realized. And I think a portion of that was a lot of it kind of felt like it was stretching.
what do you mean?
So
Like, it was longer
like-
than it needed to be?
No, more grandiose than I think it was. It was trying to be more grandiose than what it actually was, is kind of how I felt. Like stretching in the sense that they were putting all these beats and production together and trying to make it feel like it was something really, really incredible, and it never actually got there. It just kind of was a lot of, I don't want to say fluff, because I do think there's some really great stuff in here, but like I mentioned, I just felt like it didn't fully realize its potential. I felt like if he took, I don't know what his follow-up stuff is like.
You've never heard
any of it.
Sicko Mode?
Oh, well, I've heard Sicko Mode.
Yeah, well then you have heard more of it.
Okay. Well, then maybe I have, but but I don't like, I haven't listened to a whole other additional album.
Sure. Yeah.
So it feels like maybe the next album, maybe he got there. I don't really know, but it felt like this album, they were still trying to find it, or he was still trying to find it.
So it's funny that you say that, actually, because, and I have not listened to another album from him as well. But it's funny that you say that, because the hype is very much that this is his best project. Like, this was his first album. His next album, a lot of people said, was very generic, as opposed to this, which, again, for this genre at this time, incredibly creative. And then the next album, people said, was kind of generic. And then Astroworld, people did like, for sure, but I wouldn't say people liked it as much as this. I mean, Astroworld's the new one, in case you don't know.
I have seen that, and I have seen images from his Astroworld tour, and that shit looks ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this guy's like pretty on top of the world. He's really popular. And I'm glad about that. I mean, frankly, I'm not really sure what you mean, to be honest. Like, I'm kind of confused, because I mean, with the point that you make about it, maybe reaching higher than it hits, because I mean, if we're gonna say it doesn't achieve any form of grandiosity, I just don't agree at all. I mean, for starters, like, the song 90210, I mean, is just incredible. It's just amazing. Like that, and then that, and Pray for Love and Nightcrawler back to back to back. Like, I mean, I don't know if he's shooting for a grandiosity here yet. It seems like nowadays he definitely is. But I would just say that this is just a really fully realized, creative, textured, and like lush trap album. I mean, I feel like it could have been better. Like, for example, I feel like the album just kind of stops. I feel like Apple Pie as the closer is probably the weakest song on the record, maybe anyway. And it's not really much of a satisfying ending, but then like the final monologue is just tossed in at the end of the song, and it's just kind of like, okay, well, it didn't really feel like the concept was all the way finished by that point, and maybe just a different song there would have been better. And other little things, like, I don't think every song was amazing, but to me, like, this is a very strong, very coherent, and just super creative album that I don't I don't really understand what your point is.
And maybe a portion of it is actually what you just mentioned, because I'm glad that you called it apple pie, because I felt the same way, and maybe that one left a weird sour taste in my mouth at the very end of this thing, the sour taste in my ears.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, you even called it out. It kind of just felt like it was like, okay,
Yeah, that's
here's
it.
the end.
Yeah.
And that's probably a portion of where my perception is coming from too, because obviously how you close something is very important, just as how you open it. Now I will talk about, let's go to the opposite end. I do think pornography is a great opener to this thing.
Yes. 100%.
But I feel like another thing that I want to point out is a lot of these tracks felt long. So I did mention the stretching thing, and you asked if I thought that some of them felt like they stretched out more than they should, and I do think that was the case in a couple of these. I mean, some of these tracks are almost 6 minutes, and I feel the fatigue, especially with like "Oh My Dis Side." There's only so many times you can say that until I'm like, okay, I get it.
Oh man, that one hurt. Oh my dis side too long. What? No. Oh my dis side's too short. I want 10-minute oh my dis side today. Come on. Well, like, actually, that's a good example of a song though that has a beat, has like a switch up in the middle. Like, it's called Oh My Dis Side because it's like oh my and then dis side, like two different songs kind of together. Where like the first half is like oh my, oh my, oh my, and then the next part is the dis. Well, actually, on the point of songs stretching out too long, there's only one where I actually agree. I think 3500 didn't need to be 7 minutes. That's probably the only one where I'll agree with that. 3500 like really starts, it's just like, okay, like there's just like another verse and another verse and another verse and another verse and another verse, and then like at the very final portion of the song it does this thing where like the beat slows down and it's just kind of awkward. I mean, the hook on that song is so incredible that like I don't care too much, but that's one moment where maybe it could have been trimmed a little bit. I mean, you know, the album's a little over an hour, and was that really necessary? Maybe not. You know, like, there are some songs here that I don't think are amazing that I would have just cut entirely, and you probably would have had a better, more, little bit more of a concise project. But I certainly don't feel that takes a hit at the cohesiveness of the entire album. Oh, I wanted to mention something as well because you brought up.
Wait,
before
you move there, I just want to say I want you to remember I'm a millennial and I need my stuff now, and
That's
I need
right.
it fast.
I have a low attention span. Yeah, I'm not a millennial. I'm a boomer, so I was able to handle the length.
Yeah, I figured that's why. I need my participation trophy for getting through this album. So.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to call out some of the features because something fun about this is like a lot of these features, the actual verses themselves are just like fucking terrible, but it's like good. That like, okay, there's a Chief Keef feature on Nightcrawler, for example, which is just hilariously bad, but like in a good way. Like it's super entertaining. You get a Young not Young Thug, 2 Chainz feature, which again is like it's kind of shit, but like it's fun, like it's really entertaining. I enjoy all the features here, and I can't believe it, but the Justin Bieber feature is like good, like it's actually good. You know, not only is there a Justin Bieber feature that I don't like hate, but like it's good. Like he fits the song pretty well on Maria I'm Drunk. And yeah, I mean, I think the features here are a lot of fun. Travis Scott kind of reminds me of a Kanye figure in that, you know, he's sort of like this, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost like a curator, you know, like bringing on all of this, I mean, talent from the genre onto his records and things like that. It does remind me of Kanye in that way. And I feel like they're all pretty worthwhile and good. The one thing we didn't mention at all, though, is, and something that's big about Travis Scott, is like the auto-crooning stuff. So how did you feel about that? If you don't know what that is, it's like singing with auto-tune and a lot, and using auto-tune as an instrument.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I've never been opposed to that. I didn't feel like it was anything that detracted from the album. I felt like it was used okay. It's not. We're not talking about what's his face. The I'm on a boat guy.
T-Pain.
T-Pain here, which I don't know if you've ever seen any of those. This is a just complete aside, but have you ever seen any of those T-Pain like acoustic? He's in the library. Like the dude can
No.
actually really sing.
No, I don't know about that.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy actually. So I don't know why he just like lives in the auto-tune world, but like he actually has vocal chops.
Hmm.
Anyway, so I don't know. Do you have anything specific to add to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's like great actually. Like, I really like how Travis Scott uses autotune. I think it adds a lot. You know, I have no idea how well he can sing on his own. You have to be you like you have to be able to at least sing acceptably to sound good with autotune. Okay, because like if you are just completely awful at singing and your singing voice is horrible and you can't hit notes, autotune's not going to save you. Like, it's just not. I don't know how good of a singer he is without it, but he uses it really, really well. And again, it does remind me of Kanye again in that way. So I mean, like, you know, I think it's one of the places where maybe I could kind of understand somebody finding it annoying. I think there's a lot of people that still really hate autotune, which is kind of sad because it can be used really well, and a lot of artists have proven it can be used as an instrument in itself.
Yeah, it's really just a tool.
Yeah, but I can understand, like, maybe on like the Oh My part of Oh My Diss side, somebody kind of finds that grating or something. I could kind of get it, because I certainly did it first as well. But I mean, I feel like it really works on this record. And also I think it adds some consistency to it as well, because on most songs you're gonna hear Travis Scott auto crooning, which is a good way to tie everything together. Yeah, what did you think of 90210? Because to me that song is just a fucking masterpiece.
Yeah, I think that's probably my favorite track from the whole record. I like that one. I like Maria I'm Drunk a lot too, actually.
Yeah, that's a really good one too. Yeah.
Just a lot of varied sound. Like you mentioned, the Justin Bieber feature, and I mentioned at the beginning too, was actually pretty good, pretty fun. So.
Yeah, it's a little crazy, but it indeed is. I don't know. Are we done? Because I feel like we might, if we want to wrap it up, then you can go ahead and do that.
Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts?
Not that I can't share after you go.
Okay. Yeah. Like I said, I mean, I don't want to sound overly pessimistic. I'll give my review score. I'd probably put this in a 7.5. Like I still enjoyed it. There were tracks that I really liked a lot. Like I mentioned, I felt like the production quality was really high. There was a lot of texture in the tracks. The features were fun, but just overall, I felt like it was trying to attain something that it didn't attain, and for whatever reason, I felt that in this case. I did feel like it stretched in that capacity. I also felt like it stretched because I felt like some individual tracks went on too long, and just in general, I think that it went on too long. And then the other thing that we mentioned was the way that this album ends, pretty anticlimactic as well.
But would you recommend it? That's the question.
I think I would recommend it. Like I mentioned at the top, I think that this is an interesting album for, especially if people are like, here's trap, and it's like, oh wow, this is actually interesting. And as you mentioned, interesting in a way that it's like, okay, this is different than probably someone's preconceived notion of what trap is. So I think that this is a really good album to introduce the genre, and there are really great tracks on this thing.
Yeah. So I would give this an 8.5. So I'll go in a point higher than Steven there. I mean, I think that, one thing that I have heard about this genre, because I really haven't listened to a lot of it, and I don't want to give the impression that I have. One thing I've heard about this genre is that a lot of these albums released by big artists, like your Migos or Future or, whoever else you can think of, a lot of them go on way too long, because we're in a day where that Spotify streams is everything. And if you can make an album with like just a shit ton of songs, then you can make a lot of revenue from that. And this album, it's not that it's necessarily short or concise or anything, but like it isn't bloated. I mean, I can agree with Steven where like there's a song here that maybe goes on longer. I don't think the album needs to be an hour, like a whole hour. I don't know how necessary that really is, but like it still feels like there was real thought put into every song being here. And even though I feel like Apple Pie isn't a super satisfying closer, he still had the thought to put that monologue in there to round it out and things like that. Where like, I don't think that this was just, let's just throw a shit ton of tracks onto this record without any care as to how they flow or work together or anything of the sort. And stuff like that. So like to me, I think that this is a really solid record. I think that some of the songs on here are just flat out amazing. And even the worst stuff here really isn't all that bad. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this to anybody who isn't into trap rap. Anybody out there who thinks they hate this genre, I would say check this out. I really think that it might kind of surprise you. You know, and if you don't like it at first, again, that's understandable, but just give it a couple rounds and see, because I mean, this is the best that I've heard from the genre so far, and I mean, I've kind of heard that it pretty much is the best that the genre has to offer. So yeah, okay. And I guess with that, we'll move on to what Steven recommended to me. So Steven, go ahead and tell the audience.
Lewis, I recommended to you the Hamilton cast album. Hamilton, pretty much entirely written by Lin-Manuel Miranda, is a musical around the life of Alexander Hamilton. Lin-Manuel wrote the musical after reading a biography from Ron Chernow. This cast album is the original Broadway cast, so it includes a whole bunch of people, but our audience listeners might know Daveed Diggs.
Yeah, from Clipping. You guys know Clipping? Bro.
Or Leslie Odom Jr.
Yeah.
He's been in some things as well. So at that, Lewis, I will turn it over to you. As I mentioned in last week, we'll try to stick to just the cast album. Both Lewis and I have seen the musical, so I might talk about one or two things here or there, but we'll try as best as possible just to stick to talking about the actual album itself.
Well, I think it'd be fair for you to bring up stuff about the musical. I mean, when I give my rating, it's definitely going to be about the album, because I did see this show, like, I don't even fucking remember when, a year ago or something? Maybe, probably more than that? I don't even remember. But I really don't remember much about it. I think I remember coming out of it having enjoyed it, but I don't remember how much. Like, honestly, I just barely remember anything about it. I kind of remember the staging and stuff, but that's about it. So I'll be upfront about that. So yeah, it's the cast album that I'm going to be talking about here. Now, I think, it should be mentioned that this is like the most popular musical or Broadway musical or whatever you want to call this that's like been possibly come out this entire decade, would you say? Because I mean, Wicked's the last one I can think of that like everybody and their mother liked. But that was like over a decade ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, and maybe Rent too.
Yeah, but to this level?
But this was a phenomenon that spanned, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but spanned interest, right? This escaped just people who are interested in fans of musicals. I mean, this was a phenomenon across pretty much everybody.
Yeah. Like, I mean, everybody I think almost everybody's heard of this. A lot of people, like, were just begging to go see it, you know, and, so, I really, like, I feel bad about this, because I don't just want to sound like I'm trying to be a contrarian dick for no reason, and I know it's very easy for me to maybe come across that way sometimes, but like I really don't want to, and like I have credit to give here. The first thing I want to say is, like, you know, I feel like when something has this insane widespread appeal, I'm always gonna be skeptical, because all the good stuff I've heard about this, is this the kind of thing that, like, you know, people who like really know and understand and like the medium of Broadway and theater and musicals are out there praising day to day? Like, is it? I don't know. Like, I honestly don't know. But I would imagine it's not. Like, in the same way, I doubt that, like, this is some kind of major critical success. Like, they're saying, like, oh, this is the best, like thing that we've seen like from Broadway in whenever. It's like I just doubt that that's happening. Um, I mean, as far as the widespread appeal thing goes, I guess I think that makes sense to me because when you listen to this, and something that's I think interesting about this as a phenomenon and as just a something that exists is that it's really mixing the worlds of show tunes and Broadway with hip hop. You know, like there's just I mean, Daveed Diggs is just a rapper. All of the characters pretty much, or at least all the male characters, just are rapping. Well, most of them anyway, are like rapping the whole time. You know, there's so many rap verses all over this thing. Like a lot of the lyrics are rapped. It's like a rapped history lesson, you know, for a lot of it anyway. And then aside from that kind of stuff, you've got the you're pretty kind of I don't want to say generic, but like you're more prototypical anyway musical fare, your kind of show tune stuff, and more often than not these two things are kind of colliding and mixing together all the way through this musical. So all through the music, so that's kind of the general gist of like what the musical sounds like, what it is, and I I think that this thing is like 2 hours of epic rap battles of history. I listen to this and it's like I'm sorry, but this to me is just it's so corny. I imagine like this feels like my history teacher like my I don't know my 60-year-old history teacher in middle school trying to like be hip with the kids in the class, but like missing the mark by a solid decade, and showing like YouTube videos of other similarly aged professors also trying to be hip with the kids, but like not really understanding that. That's like the impression I get this entire time, which is not to say that this is like as bad as epic rap battles of history or something. And by the way, I don't think that this is out of touch either. I'm likening it to something that is, but I don't really think it is. I mean, obviously I'd be wrong if I said it was anyway, because like it's popular, but it's like it sounds that way to me. Like these rap verses, some of them they range a lot. Like they range from being acceptable to being absolutely intolerable for me to listen to. And I'd say most of them tend to be towards the former, where I'm like, I'm okay with it. But when you get to the stuff where they're like literally having rap battles during the cabinet battles here and stuff, like oh man, I just don't. I just can't take it. And I'll say some positive stuff later, but I should probably let you jump in there.
Oh man, we're gonna really disagree on this one, I feel like.
Good.
So this, I want to talk about, because you kind of brought up this in context. This, I think, is the biggest thing to happen to Broadway in a very, very long time. And honestly, so much so that I don't think that this can ever be replicated. I don't even think Lin-Manuel could replicate what this thing provided to Broadway, because this was such a revolution in terms of the sound and the style of a musical, that really anything to come after it that will be like this, people will just say it's not Hamilton. Because like I said, I don't even think that Lin-Manuel could replicate not only the success, but the style and the movement that this thing created. I want to talk about this as a movement, because what was so interesting about the Hamilton hype was that this brought a whole new level of interest in not just Broadway and musicals, but also in history. This thing, classrooms started to teach this thing because so many kids of all ages were listening to it and actually getting excited about learning and about thinking about American history, but really you can apply it to anything. Now, this isn't historically accurate. that is to say. This actually has quite a number of historical inaccuracies for the sake of making it a more interesting story and musical. But this was being taught everywhere. And not only was it being taught everywhere, it was being taught in sections of the country that typically are underprivileged and really aren't interested or invested in education. This became something that they could stand behind and say that is unique and cool. And I mean, there were people on this album, on this original Broadway cast, you mentioned it, that were just rap artists. I mean, Daveed Diggs is not someone, now he has like a really interesting career. Like he has quite a varied career. He does all these different things. I think he's even on a TV show now where he's like a teacher or something. But at the time, he was really just a rap artist in a musical. And actually, one thing that I'll mention as we talk about the musical and we connect it to here, you can kind of tell because the choreography in the musical really is not any. There really isn't choreography. It's like very light, so it's very easy for people on this cast album who are more either typical Broadway musicians or just rappers to kind of be able to be a part of the whole thing. Yeah. So I want to go back to what you mentioned about how a lot of it feels like it's just kind of epic rap battles of history. I mean, I could see that, I guess. You know, these aren't like revolutionary rhymes, although I think there is a lot of clever stuff in here and a lot of funny stuff, but we don't talk about jokes or humor on this podcast. And you also mentioned the cabinet battles. One thing I want to talk about as we think about this as like a whole thing and a 2-act musical, there are a lot of really interesting concepts here in the way that they talk about history. So one of those is framing the cabinet battles like rap battles. I think that's a really interesting way to even think about that. And some other things are like, for instance, and this is more in the play side than on the actual album. You don't really see it in the album, obviously, but when Hamilton writes down about the Reynolds pamphlet in the musical, he's talking about it in the song Hurricane and how everything's coming together and he needs to think about his legacy. And the person who hands him the quill to write down the Reynolds pamphlet is actually Mariah Reynolds from before. And she's just kind of in that whole second act after he has the affair. In the musical itself, she's just in random spots on the stage, just kind of hovering, like in the shadows. And I think that's really an interesting way to portray his constant internal battle and his shame and his guilt, to where finally she's the one who hands him the quill to write it down for the world. There's a lot of stuff like that in here that, from one, utilizing hip hop and rap and rhyme and integrating it into interesting ways to talk about history, but also integrating in interesting ways to think about traditional Broadway musicals and plays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I do want to say briefly on the topic of the play itself, I remember hearing this album before I saw the play, and I didn't really like the album, and I saw the play, and I do remember that I liked it. I don't remember how much. So definitely there must have been something going on there that I appreciated that brought these songs to a higher plane, and I definitely remember that being the case. I wish I could go more in depth about it because I really don't remember the play much, but I did like it, and that was after I'd heard this. So I know that it did kind of help my opinion of the cast recording. But just as far as the cast recording is concerned, I obviously like, and again, I want to stress again that I don't think that this, clearly this isn't just how do you do fellow kids stuff, because it's actually worked, like I said, and so I acknowledge that. Wait,
again, can we pause just a second, Louis? I want to call out the chat. Someone asked if I called this revolutionary. I did. It's a pun.
Nice. Oh, also, we should probably mention, I wanted to say that a 6th grader here says Daveed has had a stage acting career prior to Hamilton. So you may have been wrong about saying that. So let's just clear that up in case that is the case. I don't actually know. Though that would make sense. But it's like, I can't agree that there's clever stuff going on in the raps here. I straight up can't. I can't. Like, I mean, it sounds way too much like a Broadway writer trying to rap trying to write raps. Like, there's a big thing in hip hop about authenticity, right? Like that's been a thing since the very beginning. That's why people like when Vanilla Ice and people like that came about, everybody hated them, except for pop listeners, obviously. But everybody in that community hated them. And I mean, Daveed Diggs is an actual rapper. It's got some cred to a certain degree, but I found a lot of these raps, a lot of this wordplay, a lot of these rhymes to be inauthentic. And I think the problem is it's inevitably going to be because of the subject matter here. We're telling a story, we're telling a history lesson in rap. And I don't know if you can possibly do that without it coming across as inauthentic. And maybe, to give Hamilton credit, this might be some of the best execution of that you could have, because I may have given away the credit that I hate this, and I actually don't hate it. And like something with this concept, I should hate. So I have to at least give it credit for me not wanting to die while listening to 2 hours of this, because it is 2 hours long. And interestingly, I wasn't bored, and I wasn't like actively annoyed either. Which, that's good, right? Because this is long, and there's like a lot of stuff here. And if I remember correctly, the actual play was just music, right? Like this album is like basically what you'd hear if you saw the play. I don't remember.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, because that's actually one of the most interesting things that I experienced while I was watching this play. So as an album, you're hearing track to track, and I think just naturally your mind kind of fit, like with something like this, where it's a cast album or even like an album for a film, your mind, I think, just naturally kind of fills in, oh, there must be some break that I'm not getting, right? The album is playing out, but naturally there's probably some break between some of these tracks. Some of them you can tell definitely played back to back as a musical. But in the play, there is no break. It's literally just this.
Yeah.
But you're seeing it also like the choreography on stage, which is actually kind of overwhelming. So when I don't know why I felt like it was more overwhelming than listening to it like this, but it's like, strap in, bitch. We are going to teach you some history, and we're not going to stop. And it's like, boom, 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 boom. And you have to like keep track of where they are in time and space. And
yeah,
anyway.
and all of the dialogue that occurs within this soundtrack as well, like on top of the music.
There's only one thing that is omit from this Broadway track. There's actually a track between Dear Theodosia and Nonstop. That's John Lawrence dies, and that's the only thing that's really ever spoken, not sung. And they kind of talk. His wife kind of talks to him about it, and the song that's being played is a song from earlier. But it makes sense that they would omit it from this cast album, because it's not really a song there. It doesn't really add any context. But that's really the only place where it's not a sync through, as the rest of this is.
Right. Yeah, that's what I remember from the show. Yeah. Okay. So I want to be fair to this, because I've said a lot of negative stuff, and again, I don't hate this. There's actually quite a decent number of songs here that I like, and those tend to be the ones that have the least amount of rapping in this play. For the most part, the songs that are like your typical kind of Broadway fare, as far as like there's not rapping in them, they're just show tunes, those kind of songs. I actually think that some of these are really good. Some are better than others, sure, but like that's where I thought this shined the most listening to it. I feel like the show tunes are really solidly written, and it does at least make me understand that Lin-Manuel Miranda is clearly like talented and isn't just like a total hack. Because I've seen some people who like to hate on this thing, who call the guy like a total hack or have something against him or something. And it's like, when I listen to these show tunes, I'm like, no, he can write a really solid show tune. Like and obviously he can stage a play, assuming that was also his job. Because I remember when I saw this that I liked this more than I did listening to it, which obviously says something about the way it was presented on stage. And so like, I don't like, I'll say that, as well as like, yeah, some of the stuff with like the sisters and Hamilton's wife and that kind of stuff. Those songs tended to be better than other ones, and stuff like that. I also, what else did I want to say that I liked? I liked the final song. I think the final stretch of this album, once I didn't put a spoiler tag for this because this is history, so you know. Once his son dies, I think the stretch after that gets a little bit more consistent than before, and stuff like that. Yeah. Oh, the last thing I want to say that I adore the fucking stuff with the king. I think the stuff with the king is just great. And
yeah, again, this is another example of a place where I wanted to mention that there are some really unique concepts here. So I mentioned the cabinet battles, but the ones that I like a lot too, having David Diggs play the Frenchman Marquis de Lafayette in the first act, and then Thomas Jefferson, the emissary to France in the second act. I think that's really interesting. And then all the stuff with the king, thinking about the break of America from Britain as a breakup song, love ballad. I really like the way that that's played out.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, and it's just really funny. Like I remember I remember those parts of the play probably more than a lot of other stuff. I remember that stuff being like really, really funny because the actor on stage was just like super hammy, and that's kind of the whole thing about these songs too. Is they're like the most show tunesy. They're just like super hammy and stuff. Yeah, and it's really entertaining because I think you very easily could have played the king as like this kind of evil character, which I mean, you know, but I feel like it was just which would have been fair too for the record, but like I think that I think this was just much better, much more entertaining, and much more fitting to the tone of the musical as well. So I did actually really like that stuff, and you know, I also think that like musically, even some of the rap stuff is pretty interesting. Like, I think some of the fusions, purely instrumentally, of hip-hop and show tunes were done pretty seamlessly. Like, there were some points where it switches to, like, something that's more like just a rap beat with some record scratching and stuff, and that stuff is horrible. I hated every single time the beats actually became, like, just a straight-up trying to make, like, a rap beat. It was awful. Some of that shit sounded like garage band loops to me. Like, it's bad. And that was some of the worst songs here. But like the stuff where, and I think hopefully you know what I'm talking about, where they're like mixing the instruments that you hear from the show tunes stuff with the rapping. I thought that stuff was pretty seamless, if you know what I mean when I talk about that.
Yeah, the other thing that I want to call out is his use of reprise, because a lot of the songs here, they build into each other,
yeah.
And most of the songs have some callback to an earlier song in one of the acts, which I really like the way that he does that. He writes that like that, and specifically, like one very tangible example is the last track of Act 1, Nonstop, is literally a culmination of every single song that came before it in the act.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that too. I thought that showed there was a lot of thought that went into it, which I guess is especially important considering that, you know, this is the musical that you're listening to. There's no extra dialogue. Yeah. And right. Yeah, so I liked the way that tied together as well.
Yeah, and it's a lot of vocal callbacks. So they'll use similar lines from songs before, but it's also a lot of musical callbacks too, to kind of what you mentioned, where you have some of the show tunes type instruments and melodies that kind of make a little small cameo in tracks that come after.
Yeah, the last thing I guess is worth mentioning about the recording here is that I think the performances are all good. I think everyone who's singing is good. I think all the rappers can flow at least.
Except for Lin-Manuel. I will say, the one thing about this, and I think everyone's called this out in the original cast album and the original Broadway run, is Lin-Manuel not the greatest singer.
Wait, when does he sing?
I mean, just in general. Like his rap.
I don't know.
Lin-Manuel?
Yeah,
he's Hamilton.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he is Hamilton. Lin-Manuel
Okay.
Miranda.
I don't remember minding that at all. So, okay.
Oh, well, that's surprising to me, because that's usually the one thing that people call out on this thing.
Maybe it wasn't like, I don't know. I don't remember noticing that at all. So, okay, that's interesting. I guess he wasn't as like pitch perfect as everybody else, but I probably liked that because that kind of gets annoying to me. I don't know. Okay, so that's something. Yeah, but anyway, I thought that was all solid, and yeah. Everything else I think we could talk about relates to the musical. And actually, Stephen, why don't you go ahead? You already said some stuff, but if you have anything else to say specifically about like the musical itself that I couldn't mention because I forgot it, do that now.
Yeah, I think the one thing about the musical is that there's not really any huge sets or anything. Honestly, the whole musical is played on one static set that has a couple moving elements. A lot of the musical and choreography is about people bringing in and taking out different items. So they'll bring in a chair or a table, and throughout a track it'll kind of move around through the environment and through the space to kind of simulate time. They also have a rotating disc in the center that they'll use in interesting ways. So some songs that come to mind, Hurricane has a really cool number on the stage choreography where it people are holding things up in diagonal and in space to make it look like the hurricane has hit and swept everything. And the other one is Burn, which is one of the better like show tunes tracks on the album, where his wife is literally burning the letters that were written to her and throwing them in a bucket, and the bucket's on fire and all this stuff, which is pretty interesting. As I mentioned, the choreography is not anything like incredible. Most of these people, I don't think, are like, they don't really have any professional dancers in this mix. It's mainly a sing through album, so it'd be really hard to do that in general. Because it is a sing through album, if you make these people dance for 2.5 hours, it's going to be a crazy show. So the choreography is kind of static and not that intense, but it does its purpose.
Well, and I remember it being like the whole show just being kind of quaint, like that. I think that's something I appreciated, is that it wasn't overboard or overblown. Like, I definitely remember that. I remember the one stage being the same. Like, there was nothing obnoxious about it. Which, like, I kind of think of this cast recording as a little overblown, a little ridiculous and dumb. But when I saw the show, I remember not feeling that way, because I think that they kept it, for as overblown as the music is, they kept the stage stuff pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? Pretty, I'll just say quaint. Yeah, they kept it pretty quaint, which was a nice way to contrast that and keep the whole thing from just being too in your face and stupid.
So the one thing that I think we're kind of wrapping up here, right?
Yeah.
So the one final thing I wanted to mention is you called out how hip hop and rap need to be, I guess you would say, come from the heart.
What, authentic? Yeah.
Right. Be authentic. But I would say the one thing that I will give him credit for is you can feel his passion throughout this whole musical. For one, just the musical itself and the lyrics that he's writing, but two, just his passion for history and the events that transpired around Hamilton's life. I mean, the reason why he wrote this was because he was so interested after reading literally like a nonfiction autobiography of the guy. And I really feel like this exudes that from the cast album, but primarily in the play. And then you get a lot of fun quirks too. I mean, the thing is in a lot of places really overblown and over the top, and they ham it up in so many situations that, especially when you're watching the musical itself, are really hilarious. Stuff with the king, and he'll just kind of show up every now and then. He won't even sing stuff. He'll just show up and just be hamming it up on the stage. And other little like vocal interludes from Hamilton and those sorts of things. Yeah, so I just wanted to call that out.
I guess it's also worth mentioning that it's cool that they're telling this story, right? Because I think of all of the founding fathers, Hamilton is the one you just don't hear about as much as some of the other guys, Like,
yeah, I feel like the majority of what you hear about him is the duel that happens.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I think, like, you kind of hear, he set up a national bank, and it's like, okay, and that's kind of all you know. But, like, I appreciate that they're telling it, because he is a very important figure. I think that something that's pretty essential about the musical we didn't really mention is, they casted all of these, in their day, white, wealthy slave owners as people of color, which was a pretty cool twist. I also think that using that... just as a political gesture is pretty cool. But on top of that, like, some of the lines in the play kind of call that fact out as well. And I'm actually glad they didn't breeze over that. Because I feel like that's pretty important. And when you're doing a play where you're like, where you could be glorifying these people who are glorified a lot, I think it's important that you don't breeze over it. But I also think it's important that you don't, like, if you're telling this history, you don't just like focus on that so much to the point where you're like ham-fisting like that fact as well, you know? Like,
yeah, and that's a good point too, because I think what's interesting here and what often gets overlooked in history, or you never get a complete story as you're thinking about just like pure history, is that all of these characters, as much as they're immortalized and talked about, all of these characters in this musical specifically have real flaws. You see flaws from George Washington, who's like, you know, in the American psyche is this god. You see flaws from Thomas Jefferson, from Hamilton, definitely, and from others. And I think that's a really important point on telling a history and telling a story like this. Because, one, it helps your story, right? If they were all just like these people you put on a pedestal, then it wouldn't be very interesting to tell. So it helps in two ways, and it goes directly to your point there.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we're ready to wrap it up, right? Because yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I give this cast recording, not musical, okay? I give this cast recording a 5 because I'm pretty much dead split down the middle with it. Like, I think the rapping gets pretty terrible at points. I think it gets acceptable at others. I think the show tunes here are mostly pretty decent, sometimes really good. And I think there's a lot of thought put into this overall, where listening to it for 2 hours isn't actually a chore, which is good. But I also don't like it. And if I could go the rest of my life never hearing this in its entirety again, I would be very thankful for that. I did find this to be kind of cringeworthy at points. I called it, I likened it to epic rap battles of history, and I really do feel that way a lot of the time. And I guess I just don't really think that you can rap history. I just don't really think you can. And if you can, somebody else will have to prove that to me later down the line, you know, because I don't really feel like this proved that to me. But like I said, I feel like this is executed better than I would have thought if you told me what it was without me having any understanding or having heard it before. So I give it credit for that. I think I remember liking the musical, but I can't like score it or recommend it because I don't remember enough. But I'm pretty sure I enjoyed it. So I guess that says something as well. And I mean, would I recommend this? I mean, like, it's a tough question for me because I have to weigh that against, like, for my own personal, like, for the kind of people that I hang out with and like talk to music about, no, I wouldn't. But to like anybody else, I mean, maybe. Certainly, this is probably a more entertaining way to learn about Alexander Hamilton than like reading it in a history textbook. So if you're really interested, I mean, you know, this is good, but you'd also have to check other sources because, again, some of this isn't accurate. So that's, you know, would I recommend it? It depends on who you are, I guess. And those are my thoughts.
I fell in love with this the second I heard it, and having now seen the musical, I only enjoy it that much more. I think for me, I want to give this a 9, only because I think that you do need, although I never really had a problem with it, you do need that extra context of actually seeing it on stage to really get a full grasp and a full understanding and realization of what this thing can be. So if I'm talking about just the cast album, I give just the cast album a 9, maybe as much as a 9.5. Like I mentioned, I really like a lot of the unique ideas here. I think that a lot of the rhymes are fun. This isn't trying to be anything other than it is. I mean, it's not trying to be this amazing rap album that's going to solidify itself in the genre of rap. Although it did get #1 on the rap charts, which is interesting for a musical Broadway cast album. But with that being said, I think that so much here is so great, and this original Broadway cast is really good, especially as Lewis mentioned, in the show tunes. Leslie Odom Jr. specifically, his portrayal of Burr and his show tunes that he has in the cast album are really great.
Yeah. So I guess you're saying you would.
And I would absolutely. Yeah. Oh yeah, I would absolutely recommend this. Although I would say 100% without a doubt, I recommend, if you can, go see the musical. get cheap seats, whatever you need to do, but it is something really unique and original and I think incredible.
Yeah, and that might
Do I
be a
want?
fair
Do I
recommendation because I
Do I
think I like.
100%? Yeah, I and I think that's fair. I do. I 100% recommend the cast album to everyone. Maybe not. It actually is kind of hard to follow at times. It does move really fast, and it is really long. And if you kind of zone out for a second, you won't really know what's happening. But with that being said, it's definitely better than No Love Deep Web.
Yeah, which is what everybody's saying. Like always, whenever you like anything, you're never gonna live that down, Steven. You're never gonna live that down ever. Fantastic. Thank you, chat.
That is right. And Chad, Hamilton is the Ariana Grande of musicals. So I just like to go ahead and say that.
Cool.
Meaning it's perfect in every way.
I think we're ready to move on to recommendations, right?
Yeah, let's do it.
Which means that I'm going first. So, Steven, I'm recommending to you an album by Green Day. The album is called American Idiot. This album came out in 2004. I mean, everybody knows that. It's like, I probably, no, it pretty much is the last major cultural icon rock album to have ever been released. Like, nothing after this hit the radio like this did. I don't know if anything sold as well. That at least like this, you know, like we're not talking about like Imagine Dragons because they don't even really count. And so, you know, maybe American Idiot will be that for the rest of time. Who knows? But to this point, it certainly is. So, anyway, all right, what do you got for me?
Well, this is going to be a fun episode next week. Okay, Lewis, I recommend to you the first season of the CW program Arrow. This is a CW show about the DC Comics superhero Green Arrow. And that's pretty much all you need to know. I will say the one thing about it is I think the first season is a full-length season, which is something like 20-something episodes. I don't really think you need to watch all of them. You can probably kind of skip your way through or watch them in 2 times speed or something, however you want to do it. But that's my recommendation to you.
Great. Okay. So I guess when we come back, that'll be our episode. I'm kind of glad that for once we recommended things that were actually in substantially different formats because it's been a while since we did that. But you know, that's fine. So yeah, do we have anything else we want to say? I think we mentioned Castbox, right? We're not up on there yet, but hopefully I get around to that. I don't know if there's anything else that needs to be said though.
No, I think that's it from us.
Yeah, okay. Well, then those were our thoughts. Those are our recommendations. Get wrecked.